Okay, so I started off by writing out all the information you knew. Sandwiches are $4.50, pizza's $10, and they want to raise $2,500. So then I made my equation: 4.5x plus 10y equals 2,500, and then I separated them out, and I got my x-intercept to be 556 and my y to be 250. And then points are 200 and 150, 100, 210, 300, and 110.
So can you explain how you could go about finding like the 200? How could we find?
I went to the 200 and then you just follow up till the line meets the graph, the line to it.
So you can use the graph that you're given, and as she said, like pick a number and see where it matches with the line that you drew. That would be one way. We're going to talk about another way that you can go about doing that as well. Shaylin, if you don't mind just leaving that up there. Any questions for Shaylin? Awesome. Thank you. Nice job. Makes it easier. All right, so Shaylin got the equation, found the intercepts, which was part of 30. So get the equation, find the intercepts by plugging a 0 in for one of the variables, dividing and solving, and then graphing it. So that was question 30. 31 wanted you to find combinations that satisfy the model. So that means that you need to find 3 sets of ordered pairs, or you could think of it as, I need to figure out if I sell this number of sandwiches, how many pizzas do I have to sell? And one of the ways that you can do that is by trying to look at the graph, like she said, and figure out a place where it matches. So it looks like if you have 200 going up, then that should correlate with 150. However, that may not be totally correct, because when you're graphing, there's a little bit of margin of error because you're physically graphing it yourself, not a computer-generated model. So it's okay, but how else could I figure out, what would be another way that we could figure out some combinations algebraically? Shaylin?
Plug the numbers in, so like for x you would plug in like 200 and see what you got the line.
Right. So you could take the equation. I'm just going to cover this up for you. The 4.5x plus 10y equals 250. You could plug in a number for x, like the 200. And it doesn't have to be 200. You can pick any number that you feel like choosing and get y by itself. You could also take the original and do that 3 times. Sorry, before I go ahead. You would do that 3 times to get 3 separate pairs. So 200 stands for the number of sandwiches. Whatever I get for y would be the number of pizzas I have to sell. The other way you could do it is to, again, take this equation, but get it in y equals form. So if I take that equation and get it in y equals form, I would subtract 4.5 and then divide by 10. So my equation would be negative 0.45x plus 250. If an equation is in y equals form, it's really easy to pick any random x and to get out a matching y value. It's totally up to you what you want to choose. Some of them will not be exact, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be exact, because you're just trying to find combinations that work. And they're infinite. Anything you pick for x will always have a matching y, because it's an equation. X is the independent variable. Plug something in, get something out. So you don't have to have the numbers that were chosen on the answer sheet. That's totally up to you, whatever you want to pick. So if you wanted to pick a 300 here. Doesn't go up to, yeah, it does. You could pick 300 because it goes over to like 600-ish. So you could choose 300 for X. You could choose 150 for X. You could choose 75 for X. But any of those combinations would work. Just know that they actually correlate to how many sandwiches and pizzas that you're actually selling. Any questions with those two problems? So the other one that I wanted to talk about, and thank you, the three of you, for doing problems today. Nice job, all of you. I like color coordinated. I'm all about that. With each color, Emma did the coloring yesterday. The other problem I wanted to look at was the depreciation problem. Because this one actually asks you to interpret what it means, what it represents. We're going to be doing a lot of that next week, trying to explain how math interprets into like real life, real world situations. So if something depreciates, what's that mean? A business purchased a piece of equipment for $500,000. It says it's linear depreciation. What's that going to mean, Mackenzie?
The cost that's going down, right?
Yeah. So the cost of whatever you buy is no longer worth that original amount. It's decreased because it's depreciated. What depreciates? Brady. Cars. Yeah, that's probably like the number one thing. As soon as you drive that car off the lot, you're no longer going to get the $30,000 that you paid for it, unless it's one of the companies, there's only a handful of them, that actually let you have the car for a couple of days, and then you could say, hey, I don't like it, take it back for the original cost. That doesn't happen very often. But cars would be like one of the big things that depreciates. Anything like equipment, TV, my Mac, the iPad, your iPhone. Like if you have your iPhone and you use it for 2 years, and you go to turn it in because you're done with your phone, you want a new one, you get like nothing back for that phone. It's not really worth very much. Maybe you could sell it on Craigslist or sell it to a friend and you get something, but not the $600 you paid for it, that's for sure. So things depreciate, they lose value. What's appreciate mean? Mitchell.
Gain value.
What gains value?
Whenever you put money in a bank and it goes up.
Yes,
up.
so you put money in a bank, it earns interest. Right now it earns a little bit of interest, but it still earns some kind of interest. What else would appreciate? Alice? Yeah, antiques. So if there's special antiques, maybe your grandmother has something really old in her house that could be worth a lot of money and she may not even realize it. You have to take one of those appraisers. Mitchell?
The stock market.
In stock market, hopefully, not always.
Violence.
Oh, I guess if you have a nice one, huh?
Well, the older it is, the better it sounds.
Oh, really? Didn't know that. Houses appreciate in value as long as the economy is doing well. But I know in this region, I don't know if the house has ever declined in value. It usually appreciates. Baseball cards, gold, silver, those kind of things generally appreciate in value. So this problem here wants us to find the intercepts of the model. And it says, it gives you an equation, so you don't have to come up with it like you had to do in the fundraiser. But V is value, T is time. And I apologize for the screen going in and out. It's because of the sun. So 3 times the value plus 250,000, T, is equal to 1.5 million. So if I want to find intercepts, I know it's not an X and a Y, but the process is still the same. How could I find one of the intercepts? What would you do? So Ben, what intercept could I find? Pick one. Let's find an intercept.
Intercept. I didn't really get this.
Oh, so I'm picking on you and I'm sorry. Lexi.
It's like the one where I did where you can plug in the zeros.
Yeah, so it's exactly like the one Lexi did, except it's not an X and a Y, but you're still going to do the same thing. So if we plug a 0 in for value, that means we're going to try and find T. So I'd have 250,000 times T, and then 1.5 million. So when you plug a 0 in, that part of the problem goes away. If we divide 1.5 million by 250,000, Lexi, do you know what that makes? Sorry, somebody know what it makes?
Sorry.
What is it?
6.
Yeah, 6. 6 what? Years. So this represents 6 years. If I write it as an ordered pair, I plugged in a 0 for the value, and we got out 6 years. 6 is your x variable. Time is always x. Whether it's time in minutes, time in years, time in months, time is your x value because it is the independent variable. Depreciation depends on time. Things depend on how long something takes. So my y variable was really the v. So here's the v, here's the t. So if I were asked to describe what the t-intercept represents, what does 6, 0 really mean? Shaylin?
Represents the number of years that
So, yeah, this is the number of years that pass. After 6 years, how much is my equipment worth? Mitchell?
Nothing.
Nothing. That's what the 0 stands for. So the value isn't worth a thing after 6 years. So you're probably going to keep on using it until it breaks because you're not going to get anything for it to trade it in. So that's what this 6, 0, or the 6 years represents. It's going to be the value after a number of years. In this case, the value is 0 after 6 years worth of time. I would find the other intercept by pretty much doing the same thing because it did ask you to find both, not just one. So find the intercepts. So if I'm finding the other one, I'd plug in a 0, put it equal to that 1,500. So, I'm sorry, 1.5 million. So really we're taking 1.5 million, dividing it by 3 to find the value. Does anybody know what that is? 1.5 million divided by 3, Mitchell?
500,000.
500,000. So if I write that as an ordered pair, sorry, I would have 0, 500,000. Because I plugged a 0 in for time, I got out 500,000 for my value. If you were asked to explain what that meant, when time is 0, meaning you just bought the equipment, it's still worth $500,000, which makes sense because in the problem it says you purchased it for $500,000. So when you're buying it, time hasn't passed yet. Any questions on that part? Emma, say again.
I'm sorry. Why does it multiply the value by 3?
Oh, the number that I have no clue why they have that number. It's going to have something to do with the type of equipment that it is and how it depreciates. So each equipment, like a car, is going to be different than my MacBook, different than a TV. So it would have some kind of depreciation value. We could figure that out by taking like a bunch of different cars and figuring out in 6 years, like what is it worth, and then trying to graph a line. But I don't know how they come up with this information for that problem. I can't tell you that. Using data of some sort, but what data they used and like what equipment it is kind of hard to say. Other questions? The last problem here, number 29, wanted you to find the slope of the model. Finding the slope of the model, the key thing is to remember your independent versus your dependent variable. So if I'm finding slope, generally we need it to be in y equals mx plus b form. However, I don't have a y and a b, I have a v and a t. So you need to solve the equation so that you have v equals mt plus b. So it's thinking about your x and y values or your independent and dependent variables. Yes, Sarah?
You just use like the points.
So you could pick a couple of points to pick. Yeah, you can
Could you use the 6?
you can use the two intercepts. Sure, the 6, 0 and then the 0, 500,000. You could use that as well and find the slope that way. Yes. So she said you could use the ordered pairs from. Whoop. You could also use these two ordered pairs and calculate the slope that way as well. Are there questions on this problem? So just kind of thinking ahead, next week we're going to be doing a lot of word problems like this where we are given data and I will be showing you how to come up with the slope and the y-intercept, so we'll be talking about that next week. It'll all be word problems and we'll be doing a lot of interpreting and explaining what things mean. in a class like this, if you were in regular Algebra 2, you might not be completely expected to thoroughly understand how things mean in a problem versus real world situations. However, if I gave you that same test that the regular Algebra 2 kids are taking, you're not really taking an honors level test. So questions like that, like what does it mean, what does it represent, going above and beyond the typical plug and chug through a problem, are things that will definitely be coming on your tests and quizzes. So not just the basic word problem or the basic plug and chug problem, but can you analyze and go above and beyond? Because that's what makes an honors class an honors class. Questions? And we're going to do a couple of notes today talking about lines. So you can put this away because I did come around to check it. Tomorrow I will be collecting the homework. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I'll take it so that I can record it. Yeah. Thank you, Rachel. It's page 15 in your packet. We're going to look at slope-intercept form and then also point-slope form. Do you guys remember point-slope form? Yes? Maybe a little. You probably didn't use it as much as y-intercept form. I think people use y-intercept form a lot because it's graphable. It's something that you can easily remember how to plug points in for. But point-slope form, I'll show you it. Actually, it's really easy to use and sometimes better to use because the equation then already has your variables in it. But it's totally your preference, but I will show you and remind you how to use both of them. So point-slope form is y minus y1, and then your slope, x minus x1. It gets its name because it has a point in it, the x1, y1 create the ordered pair, and it has the slope in it. So point-slope form should contain a point, which you're going to be given so that you can use that information. And then, of course, the slope is always m. In any type of problem, if there's an m, whatever form it is, it's going to be your slope. Little m always represents slope. So 2 different ways we can write equations of lines. You can use point-slope form, you can use slope-intercept form. Generally, we pick the one to use based off the type of information you're given. If you were given a slope and a y-intercept, meaning the problem just says slope is 3, the y-intercept is -5. You wouldn't use point-slope form because you don't have a point. You just have the slope and the y-intercept. You would plug them in, so m is 3, b is -5. And that's all you would do. I can't use the point-slope form, but slope-intercept form works because that's the information that you're given. The second case would be if you're given a slope and a point. This is the case where using point-slope form, to me, actually works pretty easily. But you can still use y equals mx plus b. You could use either one. It's pretty much your choice. The last possible way that we can write an equation of a line is if you're given 2 points. If you're given 2 points, we have to find the slope first and then go back to point-slope form or slope-intercept form. So if you look at the first example, this one pretty much deals with you're given slope, you're given y-intercept, write the equation of a line. So the easiest case or easiest scenario that you could deal with. So slope is 1/2, the b value is 5. So Jake, if I wanted to write an equation with the slope of 1/2 and the b of 5, it would be y equals
Point slope?
just nope, slope intercept.
Oh, it would be y equals 1/2 x plus 5.
Yep, that's it. So that means the second one would be -3/8 x minus 2. There's like no work that you need to do. Just plugging them in for m and b. The third one is a graph. So, Elena, how would we use the graph to come up with the slope and y-intercept?
Well, if you use, you could rise and run, so go down 3 should be -3, and the 2 is -3 times the slope.
you have a graph, look on the graph to see where the line goes through the next corner or box. And then you just need to count from the left to the right what it takes you to get there. So she said down 3, so that would be -3, and then the run is to the right 2. So that's just calculating, counting down and over to get to the next point where the line crosses through the corner of a box. So that would be -3/2 x, and then +1. The y-intercept's given, it's labeled. It won't always be labeled, but in that picture it was. Questions? The next group, for example 2, I would like you to draw 4 boxes, because I want to show you how to use point slope form so that you don't always revert to y-intercept or slope-intercept form. We'll do it both ways, just so that you can see the difference. So this question says to write the equation of a line that passes through the point 2, 1 and has a slope of 2. So if I were to use slope-intercept form, because it's probably the most common form that people tend to use, Alice, how could I use the point and the slope with y equals mx plus b?
Oh, you could put the 2 in front of the x, so maybe y equals.
So 2 in front of the x. What else could we put in? What's the y value? 1, yeah. Here's my xy. So y is 1, and the x is 2. So when you're using slope-intercept form, the point is xy, the slope is the m. That means I need to find the intercept. They don't give us that information, but we can multiply 2 times 2, and then we can solve for b. So if we subtract 4, we get b equal -3. Go back and write your equation. So here's the slope. We just found b. Make sure you pull them together in equation form. So 2x minus 3. So when you're using slope-intercept form, you're plugging the point in, you're plugging the slope in, you're finding b. After you find b, you've got to go back and rewrite the equation. If you look at the other form that I'd like you to try as well, this is point slope form. So it says y minus y1, m, and then in the parentheses the quantity x minus x1. Can anybody plug in the numbers correctly here? Mackenzie?
Y minus 1 equals 2 x minus 2.
Yeah. So you're not replacing the regular x and the regular y. You're replacing the x1, the y1. So you're keeping variables in the problem. So when we solve this, we have 2x minus 4. And then adding the 1 to the other side, now I have 2x minus 3. I like this form because x and y remain in the problem. You already have the equation once you simplify. Where this one here, you don't have x and y in the problem because you've replaced them. You have to go and rewrite the problem again. But it's personal preference. So either one works. You can see I still get the same answer. So if we do the same thing with the second one, I'd like you to do it both ways, just to kind of get used to seeing both formats. Maddie Gray, can you plug in numbers for y equals mx plus b?
Y would be -1,
Mm-hmm.
m would be -1/2.
Good.
X.
And what's the x that we can put in? 8. Good. So again, simplify it, solve for b. -1/2 of 8 is -4. And then if I add 4 to the other side, -1 plus 4 makes +3. So my equation would say -1/2 x plus 3. Questions? Megan, can you plug in the point slope values?
It
be careful when you're plugging a negative in. There's a negative in the problem, and there was a negative 1 in my ordered pair, so that becomes a y plus 1. Again, you're going to distribute to simplify, so we get negative 1/2 x, and then negative 1/2 and negative 8 make a positive 4. So to get the 1 to the other side, we're going to subtract 1, and we end up with 1/2 x. 4 minus 1 makes a positive 3.
Please pardon the
You
interruption.
want to flip the page,
Picture
see if
day
you can
is
see at
tomorrow.
the top.
Students will be called down to the auditorium for their pictures alphabetically by last name. You must report to your class period teacher for attendance before leaving to get your picture taken. All students will get their picture taken regardless of whether or not they plan to purchase a package. Your picture will be used for the yearbook and will also be used for your student ID. Students who wish to have their picture taken for the yearbook are also welcome to come to the auditorium when announced, if you do not plan to submit your own senior photo. Thank you, and if you need forms, please stop in the main office.
All right, so the top of the next page wants us to, again, write an equation that passes through. In this case, I have a set of points, so we want to write an equation that passes through a set of points. In order to do that, you have to have slope first. I can't just plug in those points because there isn't a slope for us to use for the formula. So we need to make sure you're calculating slope first. So the slope in this problem, letter A, would be negative 5/2. You pick the way you want to solve the equation. So if you choose to write the equation using point-slope form, then you can do it that way. If you like to use slope-intercept, y equals mx plus b, then use one of the points and slope-intercept form. Totally up to you. So Ben, which form do you prefer to use?
I'll use point slope.
Point-slope. Okay, so if we use point-slope, we would have y minus 20, or you could use the other ordered pair as well, equals negative 5/2, and then x plus 8. Anybody know what negative 5/2 times 8 is? Yes.
Negative 1.
Negative 20? Is something wrong? Question? No. So, Rachel, what happens when I simplify this?
You get 0.
You get 0. So if I add 20 to the other side, you end up getting 0, and you're just left with negative 5/2 x. So if you use point-slope form, you get negative 5/2 x. If you use slope-intercept form, you should still get negative 5/2 x. The b value is 0 when you use slope-intercept form. Questions? You don't have to use negative 8 and 20. You could have chosen to use negative 6 and 15. The other one, letter B, this one has decimals, so you might need to revert to the calculator. Anybody have a number on the top calculated? Mitchell?
Oh, never mind.
Never mind. Emily?
Negative 3.5.
And on the bottom?
2.8.
And then if we divide those, it actually works out nice.
It was supposed to be 3.5.
Yeah.
She said 3.5 and I wrote 4.
Doesn't work out.
It does. I promise. Anybody know? Emily, do you know what it is? When you divide these two?
Negative 1.25.
Yeah, negative 1.25. So that's negative 1.25. And then use either method. I can show you it with slope-intercept form instead. So 0.9 equals negative 1.25 times 0.6 plus b. Medina, do you know what negative 1.25 times 0.6 is?
I got 1.25
And then,
Or that's my answer.
that's your answer?
But for that number, I use the negative 6.
It's negative 1.75. And then you add that, you get 1.65. Any questions? So the last set, I do want to at least start with you because you do have homework problems like this. It's still using the formula for the equation of a line, but you need to remember how to find a parallel slope, and you need to remember how to get a perpendicular slope. So we'll at least start them. So it says write an equation of a line that passes through the point negative 1, 1. So you need to use that ordered pair and the fact that we have a line of y equals negative 2x plus 3. So if I want to come up with a line that's parallel to negative 2x plus 3, it needs to have the same slope as this current line. So that means the slope needs to still be negative 2. And then whichever form you want to use, you need to take the point negative 1, 1 and this slope and create a new line. So if I use slope-intercept form, I would say 1 equals negative 2 times negative 1 plus b, and then you'd come up with your b value, and that's negative 1. If I wanted to do perpendicular, remember perpendicular is the opposite reciprocal. So what would my slope be of an opposite reciprocal? Sarah? It would be 1/2. So I would do the same thing. I would plug in my y value of 1. My slope is now 1/2. My x value is still negative 1. So the only thing that's changing in these two is just the slope, because I'm either finding a perpendicular line, which is the 1/2, or a parallel line, which is negative 2. It has to be opposite, so currently this is negative, so this has to be a positive 1/2, and then I have to flip it. So this slope ends up being 3/2. I'm sorry, b value is 3/2. Homework is in your book tonight. 1723. Anybody interested in doing 17 or 23 tomorrow? Okay, 23. Melina, can you do 17? Have a great day.
Is there a calculator left here yesterday?
Yes. Ooh.
Guess what, man? I got like 20. You should come to my house and borrow.
Yep, thank you. I couldn't remember if I left it at home or left it here.
No.